Your presence tonight is certainly indicative of your interest in things that are divine, and I want to begin by letting you know how thankful I am to see all of you here this evening. It seems like each time I visit the facility here, there's an additional add-on. We got some plants now, a new pulpit, and the nice brick layout behind me. I think the only thing we're missing now is a baptistry. And I was talking to one of the elders a moment ago, and he said, well, we're working on that. But I know that's kind of a hefty project and might be a little bit expensive, but certainly well worth having one eventually in the near future. And we'll certainly pray to that end. But again, grateful to be here. Thanks again to the elders for allowing me to have the opportunity to speak with you. And it's just so nice to see all of you here this evening. If you will please direct your attention to Luke chapter 13, verses 1 to 5, you'll find the text that will serve as the springboard to our lesson tonight. Here in Luke chapter 13, 1 to 5, Jesus mentioned two events which were tragic events with which his hearers would have been familiar. The first one that he mentions is the tragedy of the murder of the Galileans, whom Pilate had taken and killed and mingled their blood with sacrifices. This was no doubt a major news story of their day and time. And also there was this tower that had been built, and there were 18 people upon whom that tower fell, and that tower fell upon those 18 and killed them. That was also a major news event for that particular day and time. And so Jesus would often take current events with which his hearers could readily identify, and he would make applications or lessons therefrom. And in this particular instance, he takes two tragedies which they were familiar and draws some lessons from those tragedies for their consideration. In the first place, he points out to them that these tragedies did not befall those individuals because they were sinners and being punished by God. And one of the most important lessons that you and I can learn is that when tragedy hits someone, when a tragedy befalls someone, it does not necessarily mean that God is trying to do something to that someone. Now, this does not rule out that God can work providentially in the affairs of men, but so often we are so quick to see a bad event take place or a tragic event take place in someone's life, and we're prone to think that God is somehow behind actively causing this situation to occur. And Jesus said these Galileans who were killed and who had their blood mingled with sacrifices, do you suppose they were greater sinners than all the other people that lived back during that time? And Jesus says, no, they were not. He says, furthermore, this tower that fell upon those 18 in Siloam, do you suppose that they were greater sinners than everyone that dwelled in Jerusalem, and that's why the tower fell upon them? Again, Jesus wants us to know that no, that's not the case. And so when you and I see a bad event take place, it does not necessarily mean that God is behind actively causing this bad event to take place in someone's life. And yet when you and I stop and think about our history in this country, and certain events and certain tragedies, we, just like Jesus did, can take certain major events and major tragedies, and we can draw some lessons from those tragedies. And one of the greatest tragedies that occurred in our history occurred shortly before midnight on April the 14th, 1912, and that is the sinking of the Titanic. Now, I have been a fascinating fan of the Titanic for a number of years. And I remember when I used to preach in Memphis, Tennessee, the Titanic exhibit made its way to our area where we lived. And then it started to make its journey from there to Birmingham, then to Atlanta, and then finally came to rest in Orlando, Florida, where you can tour the exhibit there. You can also tour a fascinating exhibit in Branson, Missouri, and also Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. But I distinctly remember that when the movie hit the box office in 1997, and the Titanic exhibit started making its way from state to state, that there was a mass tidal wave of Titanic fever sweeping across America. And I must confess, I started getting interested in the Titanic, and I started watching the television documentaries and the interviews with the survivors, and I was absolutely amazed over what I had seen and heard relative to the sinking of the Titanic. And so as I watched these documentaries and these interviews with the survivors, I saw a number of things as far as lessons that can be learned that were very, very appropriate when you think about the sinking of the Titanic. If Jesus could talk about a tower falling upon 18 and certain lessons that can be learned from that tragedy, then we can talk about a tragedy that cost over 1,500 people's lives. 705 people were saved, and 1,522 people perished in the sinking of the Titanic. It was the greatest maritime disaster in the history of our world. An iceberg about 800 miles off the coast of Newfoundland became the object into which the Titanic confronted. And after coming into contact with that iceberg, we all know the rest of the story. I think it's important for us to stop and maybe ask this question: who boarded the ship that was known as the Titanic? Because we can learn a valuable lesson from just looking at the passenger list. Aboard the Titanic were world-famous rich individuals such as John Jacob Astor, one of the world's wealthiest men at the time. His fortune was estimated then in the early 1900s at $150 million. And he was returning from Egypt with his 19-year-old pregnant bride. Major Archibald Butt, who was the military aide to President Taft, was aboard the Titanic on that fateful occasion. Furthermore, Benjamin Guggenheim of the American Smelting and Refining Company, his worth estimated to be about $95 million. He was a passenger. Isidore Straus, the famous clothier and merchant, his fortune was estimated to be about $50 million. He was a passenger on the ship. And J. Bruce Ismay of the International Mercantile and Marine Shipping Company, his fortune estimated to be somewhere around $40 million, and his wife's pearls, get this now, his wife's pearls, just one string of her pearls, worth, back in the 1900s, just one string worth about $250,000. And hers was said to be the finest set of pearls known for that particular day and time. Just one string of her pearls worth $250,000. And then you look furthermore that there were individuals on this ship that walked calmly and coolly on that ship. They had no idea that with all of their wealth and with all of their strength, materially speaking, that this was going to be their last voyage, at least for some of them at least. You know, these were strange times in the early 1900s. You know, we talk about our jet set today. They had a jet set back then, but those individuals didn't ride jets. Those individuals were living at a time when a lot of technology was introducing new things. And it was nothing for these extremely wealthy individuals to take their girlfriends or their wives with them so that they could be present at the unveiling of the latest invention, or so that they could say to their grandchildren in the future, "We sailed the Titanic on its maiden voyage, and it was the most luxurious craft ever crafted, and it was certainly absolutely amazing to behold." Its length, are you ready for this? 882 and a half feet long. The equivalent of 4 city blocks. And we're talking about the anchor weighing 15 and a half tons, and just one chain link from that anchor, just one of the chain links weighed 175 pounds. And then you look furthermore at the fact that it had a double bottom 5 to 6 feet thick to ensure additional safety, and 16 watertight compartments, and the luxury was unbelievable. Tennis courts, gymnasium, ballrooms, elevators. This is on a boat we're talking about. We're talking about a ship that had all kinds of fantastic luxury items on it. And if any of you have ever been to any of the exhibits, then you saw some of those luxury items on display. And I will never forget one particular item I noticed seeing amidst all the other ones that were in there was a girl's bracelet that spelled out in diamonds a girl's name, the name Amy. And here was a ship that was absolutely chocked full of riches, and yet it didn't have enough lifeboats to handle an emergency. For all of its preparations and for all of its creature comforts that it offered to people, it did not have enough lifeboats. And we'll talk more about that here in a few moments. I think it's also important to recognize this. As you stop and think about this, someone might come to their mind and say something like, who would have ever dreamed that they would need those lifeboats? The only way that the Titanic could have sunk is if both of her keel plates in her double bottom were torn away for more than half her length. And that was so improbable, it didn't even enter the field of conjecture. While there's just no way that that, quote, unsinkable ship could ever come across anything that would bring about its demise. However, shortly after the tragedy took place in 1912, a newspaper came out with this editorial cartoon, only it wasn't intended to be funny, it was intended to teach a lesson. It depicted a drawing of an iceberg, and on the side of the iceberg were written 4 letters, F-A-C-T, fact. And up against the side of the iceberg was depicted a drawing of the Titanic, and on the side of the Titanic was written the word theory. And the point of the cartoon was very, very clear. The theory was this ship could not sink. This ship could not come across anything that could bring about its demise. As a matter of fact, J. Bruce Ismay, one of the assistants who designed and built the ship, is reported to have boastfully said the day the Titanic set sail that God himself could not sink this ship. You talk about arrogance. The fact of the matter was there was something out there that could bring about its demise, and the iceberg was that fact. I think we can stop right here and learn one or two quick lessons by way of introduction, and that is this. Oftentimes, man has theories that when they come crashing into cold, hard fact, the theories are destroyed and demolished. One particular theory that I want to just highlight with you, for example, someone might have this particular theory: no one will ever know about my sin. It's secret. The elders don't know, the preachers don't know, the deacons don't know, my mother and father don't know, the people I sit next to at church. No one will ever know about the secret sins in my life that go on behind the scenes, behind the church, of the church. The fact of the matter is, Numbers 32:23 still says, be sure your sin will find you out. And young people, you may be sitting here, and I don't know what your particular situation is, and I'm not indicting you. I'm just speaking broadly enough to say, if there's anyone here thinking that your sin behind the scenes is so private that it will never surface, I can promise you this: it may take months or even sometimes years for it to surface. Don't comfort yourself into thinking that it will never become known in this life, because even if it doesn't become known in this life, the Bible says in Ecclesiastes 12:13 that the whole duty of man is to fear God and keep His commandments, but it also says this, that on the day of judgment, every secret thing that we do, whether it be good or bad, will be brought to light. In the Bible in 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 10 says that we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ to give an account of the things we've done in the body, whether it be good or bad. And Romans 14:12 says that each one of us shall give account of himself to God. And this same Apostle Paul in Romans 2:16 said, in that day, the judgment day, God shall judge the secrets of men according to my gospel. And so it doesn't matter whether we think that our secret sin will never be brought to light. That secret sin, ladies and gentlemen, if it's not repented of and forgiven by the blood of Christ, will become very apparent for all to see on the day of judgment. Very apparent. Here's another theory that man has that is absolutely demolished when it runs into the fact of truth. Man sometimes has the theory that God is, quote, too loving to send someone to hell. And man tries to comfort himself into thinking that, I'm not a terribly bad person, and I'm trying and giving a small and minimal effort, and God will just love me too much to send me to hell. God will not send me to hell. He loves me too much. He sent His Son to die for me, and if He would do that, certainly He's not going to let me be lost. Man's theory is that there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that could bring his demise around about as far as eternal damnation is concerned. But my friends, Romans 11:22 still says, behold the goodness, yes, and severity of God. He says, if you continue in what you're doing, you're going to be cut off, he says. If you repent of it, you'll feel the goodness of God bestowed upon you. Otherwise, God will punish you, and He will punish you forever. Revelation 14:11 speaks of an everlasting torment. God loves you, yes, but He's not going to sit back and watch you sin without consequence, and nor will He watch me do that. Now, having those brief introductory remarks before us, there are really four primary lessons that I want to briefly notice with you tonight as we watch the sinking of this Titanic. Four primary lessons. Number one, in a discussion of this great tragedy, we see in the first place the folly, the foolishness of unpreparedness, of a lack of preparation. I mentioned to you earlier that there were 20 lifeboats aboard that ship, each of them having a capacity of 58, nearly 60. The maximum number of people that could have been saved if those lifeboats had been crammed and jammed full would have been 1,160, and there were 2,227 people aboard. Now, please explain to me why it is they did not have enough lifeboats for the people. They didn't think it was necessary. They didn't make preparations. They didn't have any seamen assigned to the boats. A lot of these boats had their plugs completely pulled out. Some of the boats had no water, no provisions in them. Some of the boats had no sails or compasses. They had no means by which to even navigate. Ladies and gentlemen, there's only one explanation for that, and that is complete unpreparedness. And I want you to please turn to Matthew chapter 25, because long before the Titanic ever set sail, Jesus Christ warned us about the folly, the foolishness of being unprepared when the crisis is to come. In Matthew chapter 25, we find the parable of the 10 virgins, and you remember it. 5 of them were wise, verse 2 says, and 5 of them were foolish. Now the foolish virgins took their lamps, but they didn't take any oil with them. And what good is a lamp if you don't have any oil to make it burn? And the Bible goes on to say, the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps, and while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. They're not condemned for sleeping here, ladies and gentlemen. All of them slumbered and slept. That's not the problem. The problem is, if you look at the next phrase there, notice at midnight, a time when, generally speaking, people would be asleep, unless, of course, maybe you're a night owl, like some of us. But at midnight, a cry came, and behold, he says, the bridegroom cometh, go you out to meet him. And the foolish virgins arose, and the wise virgins arose, and they all trimmed their lamps. But there's a problem, isn't there? And you can readily see it. Look at verse 8. The foolish virgin says, give us of your oil. We just want to borrow some. Our lamps have gone out. And look at the response here. The wise answered, saying, not so, lest there be not enough for us and you, but go ye rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. Incidentally, I think this is a passage that we can use to show that my primary concern must be for my own salvation first and foremost, and then for the salvation of others. I learned that right here. It's true that the Great Commission beckons us to go out and save as many people as we possibly can, but not at the expense of saving ourselves first. I heard a man say some years ago, and when he said it, I thought he was being absolutely callous, but the more I think about it, the more I think he was spot on. He said, if I knew that only one person on the face of the earth that could be saved, he said, I would want it to be me, he said. And I thought to myself when I first heard that, I don't know about that. But thankfully, that more than one person can be saved, and the preacher's point is really moot because a number of people can be saved. In fact, as many people can be saved as will prepare. And in this particular situation here, we see the wise virgins unwilling to put themselves and their preparation in jeopardy in order to assist these others who were unprepared. It wasn't their personal responsibility to prepare these others for the time that the bridegroom would come. And now in Galatians chapter 6, the Bible says every man should bear his own burden, but the Bible also says, bear ye one another's burdens. There are some burdens that I can bear for you, but there are some burdens that I can't bear for you, and one of them is your preparation for heaven. I can't get prepared for you, and you can't get prepared for me. And this story tells us that the wise virgins were not willing to jeopardize their preparation to help others, to help these others who were unprepared. Again, it wasn't their personal responsibility to get these others prepared. And so many times, so many individuals are relying upon someone else to rescue them from their own lack of preparation. Look at the text here. The Bible says, while they went to buy, here are these foolish virgins. The bridegroom's coming. They know it. While they're gone to buy, the Bible says there in verse 11, notice, they that were, keyword, ready, went in with him. And then 5 of the most frightening words you will ever read, the latter part of verse 11, and the door was shut. That's some frightening words right there. And the door was shut. The Bible says afterward the other virgins came and they cried, Lord, Lord, open to us. We're ready now. We've got our oil. We finally made sufficient preparation. And the response was, the Lord says, I don't know you. You are not welcome here. And here's the application, verse 13. Look at it. He says, watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. Since we don't know the time of his coming, the message is, let's stay perpetually prepared. Perpetual preparation is what the Lord seeks here. If he had told us the exact moment of his coming, there are individuals, I am convinced, that would wait and wait and wait and wait, and then just 15 minutes before, if they could, they'd start making sufficient preparation. The Bible says, if you really love me, with reference to Christ, you'll stay prepared at all times. All times. I want you to notice in the second place, the second lesson we learn, and that is the foolishness of unconcern. There are some people who hear the warnings that are given them, but they pay no attention to the warnings. They reject the warnings, and they repudiate them, and they say, we're having too much fun to listen to you. And that happened on the Titanic. Warnings had been sent from the crow's nest, from the officer on the bridge, just 15 minutes before the Titanic struck. Other ships in the area, the Californian, sent messages about icy waters, and yet the individual on the Titanic taking these messages in a very testy sort of way, smarted back to the Californian and said, we do not need these interruptions. They were transacting commercial transactions. We don't need these interruptions. Unconcerned. Here are the warnings bombarding the Titanic one after another, and they say, we don't want to have time for this. We're too busy doing our own thing. Finally, the officer picked up the phone, but it was too late, just seconds before the crash. Didn't give them enough time to maneuver the ship away from the Titanic so that the side of the Titanic slammed into the iceberg, ripping its double bottom away from it and allowing the, quote, unsinkable ship to find enough water to enter into it, to sink it. And I want you to ask yourself whether this isn't a picture of unconcerned humanity. I want you to please turn to 2 Peter chapter 3 momentarily. And you will observe in 2 Peter chapter 3 that there were scoffers, and I'll wait till you get there. There were scoffers in 2 Peter chapter 3 who had heard the warnings about the second coming, but they had just turned those warnings off. They didn't see any signs of any imminent danger. 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 3, look at what he says. Knowing this verse, there shall come in the last days scoffers walking after their own lust. What is it? They're more consumed with their own pleasures and desires. And they say, notice, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. And here they are given the warning after warning, and they basically just turn the warning off. In essence saying, we're not concerned. Total unconcern for the warning given. And yet the Bible tells us that they perished just like those in the flood. Think about it. Here Noah preaches for 120 years. He warns of the coming judgment. He warns of the coming flood. What did Noah receive in response? A deaf ear. Those people were not listening to the warnings back during that time, and they were unprepared, and the rains came down and the floods came up, as we sometimes sing, and they were all taken away, the Bible says, as a result of that. Completely unprepared. I have often wondered, as preachers before me have, and I can't guarantee this happened, but I have often wondered whether these individuals who were listening for 120 years, Noah preach, and as the rain started to fall, and the ark started to lift, or the rain started to lift the ark and carry it away from the people who were drowning beneath it, were there individuals who tried to swim out to it and climb aboard it? Were there individuals who had heard Noah preaching all these years about the flood that was coming, and they disdained him and ridiculed him perhaps, and now they see the canopies of heaven open and the water falling in torrential downpour, and suddenly their first thought is, Noah was right. Noah offered us salvation. Where's Noah? Perhaps they tried to look for the area where Noah was. I mean, it wasn't like they moved the ark around a lot when they were probably constructing it, so they probably knew exactly where the location was. I've often wondered if some individuals tried to swim out to it, thinking Noah was right this entire time. Tried to climb aboard it, scratching on the surface, just begging to get in. The Titanic was claimed to be an unsinkable ship. Let me tell you something, the ark was unsinkable. Because God was the one at the steer, if you will. Noah's ark was unsinkable because it was being guided and governed by Almighty God. The boat upon which Jesus slept when the waves were tossing to and fro against the ship and the disciples were fearful, that ship was unsinkable because Jesus, the master of earth and sea, was aboard it, but the Titanic was not unsinkable. They should have listened to the warnings. They should have listened to them. In 1969, some of you might remember that Hurricane Camille slammed into the Gulf Coast, 200-mile-an-hour plus winds. And prior to its arrival, hurricane warnings were sent out in advance, just as is always the case. And now we're even more sophisticated today with our hurricane warning announcements that oftentimes in response to hearing those, people will board their houses up, evacuate, and head northward to get away. In 1969, there was a house full of 22 teenagers who heard the warnings to evacuate and ignored every one of them. They ignored those warnings from law enforcement officials and others who tried to beckon them to leave, and they were partying and they were having just a great time, and they didn't feel like they needed to stop and listen to any of the warnings to evacuate the coastline. And so the next day after the hurricane hit, the bodies of 22 teenagers were strewn across that coastline because they heard the warnings and said, "It's not going to happen to me. It happens to everybody else, but it's not going to happen to me." I think there are some people who know that God is going to see some people go to hell, but they have convinced themselves that's not going to happen to me. Even though I know I'm not even trying to live the Christian life, somehow, some way, there'll be a loophole and I'll escape. And we are unconcerned about that which we ought to be very concerned about. Joel 3 and verse 14 says, multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. Those individuals had a decision to make, and the decision they made was going to affect the outcome of their soul's destiny. Ladies and gentlemen, you and I have a decision to make. James chapter 5 and verse 5 says, "You've lived luxuriously," and so are those passengers aboard the Titanic. But their unconcern was their undoing, and their undoing led to their demise. Third lesson we learn. From the sinking of the Titanic, we see the folly of being pleasure mad. Those passengers. I found it sad and yet almost amazing, somewhat amusing if it were not so sad, that some of the survivors have told of the events that took place when they first learned that the Titanic was sinking. But even prior to really accepting that and believing that, many of the passengers still ran around drinking, dancing, and gambling, having a great time, completely in unbelief that the ship would be sinking, completely in unbelief that it was going to even happen. A group of gamblers stopped their games temporarily, and seeing the iceberg so close to them, tried to chip off pieces of it and have a snowball fight aboard the deck. One of the gamblers, seeing the broken bits of the iceberg scattered on the deck, jokingly said to one of his buddies, "Hey, go get me a piece of that iceberg and get it in my drink." Completely oblivious to the fact that they were sinking, completely unaware, or they just didn't even care what was taking place. And others joked about the life preservers. And some of them put their life belts on and danced around. And others looked at that and watched and laughed. And others said, in a sense, "Why should I go through the trouble of putting on this dirty life vest, messing up my beautiful gown? No way." Benjamin Guggenheim said, "I boarded this ship as a gentleman. I have the finest clothes on. I shall leave as a gentleman." He went down with the ship. He perished. One of the richest men on that ship. Went down in his luxurious tuxedo. John Jacob Astor, instead of putting on his life vest, pulled out his expensive pocket knife and cut it in half and showed his new bride what it was made of. Completely oblivious to what was taking place. He perished as well. Richest men on the ship. And there were some who came upstairs to see what happened after the jolt took place, who basically went back to bed saying, "Well, we'll be fine in a few moments." Completely oblivious. And there were some who were urged to get into the boats, and witnesses are documented to a report that some of the individuals who were urged to get into the lifeboats that were available said, in essence, "Why should we go to the trouble of getting out into the cold, murky waters when we're going to be getting back on board here in just a few minutes? I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right where I'm at." And here they are being warned and warned and warned, unconcerned. And so a lot of those lifeboats left with 10, 12, 20, capacities 58, nearly 60. The majority of those lifeboats left with 2 or 3 dozen less than what could have held them, because people simply wouldn't believe it. Someone said that John Jacob Astor was standing there in utter disbelief as the ship was sinking. And someone looked at him and said, "Man, where's your life belt?" he is reported to have said, "I didn't think I would need it." And I have to be thinking right now, wondering if someone on the day of judgment is going to be standing there and Jesus is going to ask the question, "Where is Jesus Christ in your life?" And they might reply, "I didn't think I would need him. I thought that my job and my money and my paycheck and my family and my recreational pursuits and all that I was doing, I didn't think I needed Christ. I was having a wonderful life without him." And when some people are ready to need Christ, it's going to be too late, ladies and gentlemen, for some. And that really brings me to the last point I want to mention tonight, and that is this. We see in the sinking of the Titanic the folly of procrastination. I've already alluded to it. The stewards literally had to break into some people's rooms to wake them and alert them to the peril that was imminent. And there are some individuals who hear the warnings every Sunday in church, but they pay no attention to those warnings. They turn them off just as these individuals were turning off those warnings as well. And ladies and gentlemen, I say this kindly, there are going to be some people that are going to be so sad on the day of judgment that they were so concerned about earthly matters and so unconcerned about spiritual things. Every congregation has them. Every congregation has them. Mark it down, including this one. I don't know you, but I know people. Ladies and gentlemen, a congressional hearing was held after the sinking of the Titanic, in which the final moments of the Titanic were documented. A series of explosions began to rock the ship. And when it became too late and apparent that indeed these individuals did need to get to a lifeboat, a stampede resulted. Think about it with me. In that final hour, some people standing on those decks were draped in the finest furs that money could buy. They had diamond tiaras in their hair. They had gold rings and expensive watches and bracelets. Some of them had enough money to buy that ship. And yes, the majority of the first-class passengers did make it to the lifeboats and survive, but a number of them didn't. And a number of them died. And what good was their money then? Several years ago, my wife and I were watching a documentary, and one of the survivors in the lifeboats said that some of the richest people on that ship who were now safe in the lifeboats, and that because of the frigid temperatures, actually pulled $100 bills from their own wallets and purses, struck a match, and burned their own money for a few seconds worth of heat. Can you believe it? And I thought to myself, what a vivid reminder of Proverbs 11 and verse 4. Riches profit nothing in the day of calamity. Nothing. On another documentary that I saw, there was a wealthy woman who made it to one of the lifeboats and suddenly remembered that she needed something in her stateroom, and so she begged permission from the individuals that were assisting in lowering passengers into the lifeboats. They gave her 3 minutes and said, "We're going to leave." And so she rushes back across the deck that was already slanted at a dangerous angle. She runs through the gambling area, all the money now tilted to the side, ankle deep. Nobody's concerned about that cash, by the way. She finally makes it to her stateroom, and she reaches up into her closet area, brushes away her expensive jewelry and bracelets and all this stuff, and grabs 3 small oranges and makes it back to the lifeboat just in the nick of time. One writer captures the scene like this. Listen carefully. Now that seems incredible because 30 minutes earlier she would not have chosen a crate of oranges over even the smallest diamond. But death had boarded the Titanic. One blast of its awful breath had transformed all values. Instantaneously, priceless things had become worthless. Worthless things had become priceless. And in that moment, listen, she preferred 3 small oranges to a crate of diamonds. Death will give you that kind of wisdom. When you're hanging on to life by a thread, you don't think about your bank account. You don't think about your property. You don't think about how well the stock is performing. You don't think about any of those things. Those things are insignificant when the grim reaper is knocking on the door of your heart. I can promise you those things are irrelevant. Eyewitnesses at the congressional hearing said the separation was absolutely horrible. Women being torn from their husbands. It was women and children first, of course. Some women were so reluctant to let go of their husband and to get into the boat, leaving him behind. Certain children, of course, held on as long as they could until they were finally pushed away, even when they didn't want to be. As the final lifeboat moved away from the Titanic, those who occupied it years later remembered shivering together, hearing the band, which just a few minutes before had been playing the ragtime of its day. All of a sudden, there's the song, "Nearer, My God, to Thee," being played. Time came when that great ship, over 800 feet long, became perpendicular and plunged 12,500 feet into the heart of the ocean. And this Wednesday will mark the 109th anniversary that she lay on the ocean floor as a monument to man's arrogance. Herbert John Pittman was the third officer of the Titanic. He survived. At the congressional hearing, he was asked, and I do not know why they asked him this, but they said, "Mr. Pittman, can you describe the screams as the ship was going down?" Now, I do not know why someone would want to hear that being described, but I do think it's important for us to think about this. Herbert John Pittman, in response to the question, "Can you describe the screams as the ship was going down?" buried his face in his hands and wept and said, "It was just one long, continuous moan in the dark." And the reason I mention that to you is because the way that hell is described in the Bible is as a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth in outer darkness. And if we could just take someone to the corridors of the halls of hell and have, as it were, them place their ear there, what would they report hearing? Perhaps they would say it was just one long, continuous moan. One long moan of agony at being separated from God forevermore. One long moan of agony at being plunged into the depths of a fire that will never go out. One long moan of not being able to be with Jesus forever. Yes, just as there were some individuals aboard that Titanic that were unconcerned, there are some of you here tonight that are unconcerned, apparently, about your eternal destiny. Some of you may be young, but old enough. Some of you may be middle-aged or younger and thinking, well, I'll get ready when life gets by, and when I finally get a few things sorted out in my life, then I'll give my life to God completely. Listen, you do not know the day or the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh, and you don't know when the iceberg, so to speak, is going to pop up out of nowhere and you go smashing right into the cold, dark reality of it. And you might think that you're young and invincible tonight, and you might think that you are a picture of health and nothing ever could bring you down. My folks, friends, you and I have no idea when an iceberg can come popping up out of nowhere and we crash right into the cold, dark reality of it. We don't know that. And so, is there any hope for us tonight? Absolutely. There are plenty of lifeboats available for anyone who wants to sail from earth to glory. There's always a seat available. And if anyone wants to become a child of God and be baptized for the remission of their sins, then guess what? Your ticket is there. Okay? He really paid for the ticket. You just have to accept it. And if you're a child of God and you have wandered away from the Lord and you've not living the way that you should live, this is the best time to get your life right with God. But I want to plead with those individuals here tonight who are not members of the New Testament church, who know they need to respond to heaven's invitation, who know they need to be baptized for the remission of their sins. Don't leave this building in a lost condition. It's just not worth it. How many of those individuals aboard the Titanic would love to be sitting right where you're sitting tonight? The ones who perished without Jesus Christ. They are living right now. And they're conscious, fully conscious. They can instantly recall the events that transpired 109 years ago. That memory is still there. And they would give anything to be sitting where you're sitting tonight. John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidore Straus. You can name all of them. Don't leave this building in a lost condition. Be baptized for the remission of your sins. Be restored if you need to come back to the Lord. The warning call, as it were, has been sounded from the crow's nest. Will you believe it or will you turn it off? This invitation song that our good brother has selected is for anyone to respond to heaven's invitation. And we pray you'll think about that tonight. In view of eternity, won't you please come to Jesus Christ? We stand ready to assist you in any way that we can. As together we stand and sing, won't you please come?